Our tradition here is to have a memory verse for each month. And on the first Sunday of each month, we'll do a lesson to get us familiar with what that verse is talking about, what it's referring to, and hopefully encourage us as we go through the month to not only remember the verse, but also to practice the verse. And this month's verse is a very powerful one. It's the beginning of a new quarter for our young people in their OSH lessons. And it's the theme about, I will fall, but I will rise, I will change. I will be different. And so this verse is really about that idea that there are people who will stumble, there are people who will fall, but there's also people who are going to get back up and refuse to quit. And there's also others that just one simple calamity in their life causes them to lose everything. And so that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. Another tradition we have is we give 3 key words for the lesson, and we ask people to hold up their notebooks. So if you got your notebooks this morning, hold them up real high. All right, very cool. All three words come from this verse: falls, stumble, and calamity. There's a little bit of a difference between fall and stumble. Here, that idea of falling is one who may trip over something and they do indeed fall to the ground, but it's not something that causes them to stay there. They fall, then they get back up. Stumble is the idea that they keep on stumbling, they keep on falling, they keep on being pressed down. They never seem to regain firm footing. That word stumble is based upon an idea that Brandon actually mentioned from that Hebrews passage a moment ago that talks about strengthening the weakness that we may find in our joints of our legs or our ankles. That's what this word stumble is actually from. Calamity is this idea of destruction. It's the idea of oppression. It's the idea of losing. It is the idea of something being disrupted. And when it comes to the wicked, it really refers to the idea of being weakened and overcome and harmed and hurt permanently. And so when you go through that verse, there's a lot of different things that we can see from it from the very beginning. Just some of the basics of the verse. It's convicting and also encouraging because it tells us who we are. If we're the kind of person who is always stumbling, there's always something we're tripping over. We never seem to gain firm footing. It tells you who you are. And the verse is pretty plain about it. The wicked is the one who stumbles whenever calamity comes. It tells you if you're among the righteous, that even though you may fall 7 times, and that 7 times, there's a lot of different commentaries and ideas about what that means. I don't believe this 7 carries with it the idea of a completeness, like you have completely fallen or been overwhelmed or overcome, so much as it is the 7 days that may take up an entire week. That though you might stumble every day, you might fall every day, there may be something every day that's pressing down upon you, you do not let it cause you to quit. You get back up each and every time because you are righteous. And that righteousness that you have obtained teaches you how to get back up and the direction you need to be going in. It's convicting and encouraging also that it tells us that really we ought not be the kind of people who are always falling by the same temptations. We need to learn to stop falling so much. We need to learn how to watch out for those things that cause us to stumble and to fall. But if we are the kind of people who are overcome even by one thing, because the righteous, they may fall, they may be overcome by something every day, but they don't let it keep them down. But if the one event that happens in your life, no matter how devastating it is, causes you to lose your faith, to lose your way, the Bible calls that wickedness. And we need to understand why that is. And so that's what we're going to be looking at as we go through the lesson. First and foremost, we do need to understand that falling is possible. The verse tells us not that it might be something that might happen, but that it's going to happen. We're going to have times where we might fall. And again, this falling is not necessarily about something that is sinful. As it says in the verses in that context, that the ones who are wicked are not to boast against and try to cause offense toward the household of those who are righteous. Because even when you are oppressing them, they're still going to get back up. Later in that same context, it talks about calamity and adversity, not so much about sinfulness. It would definitely include that, but it's not limited and it's not directly related to it. Because there's a lot of things that we encounter in life that can cause us to stumble and to fall. You remember what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 12. If you think you stand, take heed lest you fall. And right before that, he gave a lot of examples of Israel and how it was that they'd come out of Egyptian bondage and had all these spiritual blessings that they had in their lives, and yet they still stumbled in a variety of different ways. James 3 and verse 2 says, we all stumble in all sorts of ways, all kinds of different ways. Paul in Romans 7 talks about the fact that he would struggle against those things that the law would tell him were unlawful, and the things that he knew he did not want to do, those are the things he would actually end up doing. And the things that he decided he wanted to do because they were right and good, he wouldn't do it. And he was always struggling. And that was the problem with the old law, and that's why it was done away with. It's because all it could do is tell you you were condemned. The new law tells you that you can get back up and you don't have to be that way. You can follow after Christ. You can be married to him and not be someone who's tried to be married to Christ and the old law. And so in these verses, it's talking about the idea, knowing that you can stand, even when things overcome you. In many ways, it's like what Paul was talking about in 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 8 and 9. Paul says, we are hard pressed. That's the oppression. That's the calamity on every side, yet not crushed. We are perplexed. Again, that's the calamity. That's the problems. That's the difficulty. But they're not in despair. Persecuted. Again, we're pursued by people, but we're not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Paul knew what it was like to go through this type of living and that type of life. But Proverbs 24 and verse 10, again, in the context of where our memory verse is found, Proverbs 20 and verse 10 says that if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. Again, it's pretty convicting. And there's been times where I've had things in my life that seem so overwhelming that you just don't want to move. You don't want to do anything. You're perplexed, you're crushed, you're in despair, you feel like you're being persecuted, you feel like you're forsaken, you feel like you're destroyed. But the Bible tells us that in that day, when those things happen, if we faint, if we lose heart, if we lose our hope, lose our focus in that day, that means that our strength is small. What our memory verse is about this month is this. Yes, you're going to have those moments. And in many ways, we're just like the world around us. We have very similar problems and difficulties. We have very similar situations we find ourselves in. But on the things that are the most important, we are eternally separated. Because we have the blood of Christ, and because of that, we have hope. And that means I will not stay down. That I know that I may be going through a moment, I may be going through a storm at this particular moment of time. But when that storm goes away, I'm still going to be standing. I am not going to let it keep me down, because I know that my God reigns in heaven. And I know that I'm going to see him face to face one day. And whatever it is that I face here on the earth, I have this promise that's made to me by God, that the righteous may fall, and he may fall 7 times, but he is going to get back up. So don't let the wicked gloat or think that they have us defeated, because they do not. That hell and Satan themselves cannot keep us down because of who we are. It reminds us not only who we are, but who it is that we belong to. It tells us who we are, as I said a moment ago, that we are the righteous, and that tells us that we belong to a mighty God. And this mighty God is the one that Paul was trusting in when he was talking about these things that he and his associates were going through. That on every hand, there was nothing but the idea of death and destruction surrounding them. People trying to oppress them, people trying to make it stop. And Paul says, in all these things, we are not destroyed, we are not forsaken, we are not alone, even though it's on every side. There's examples in the scriptures, such as in Proverbs 25 and verse 26, again, where it talks about the righteous man. And it says that the righteous man who falters before the wicked is like a murky spring and a polluted well. This is why we have to be able to get back up and to stand. Because often the thing that causes us to give in and to quit is the wicked. And here it says that if you falter before the wicked, if you let these things overcome you in front of those people who are wicked, you are like a murky spring and a polluted well. You're murky to where you can't see through it. If you saw some water that had trash floating in it, that had filth floating on it, that was so that you could not see through the glass, nobody's going to drink that water. No one is enticed persuaded, thirst quenched by that water. Neither is it that way with the one who calls himself a Christian. That if we cannot stand in the midst of whatever these calamities are that we face, and we're going to face many, if we falter and the wicked see that, there is nothing that causes them to be curious about becoming a Christian. There's nothing that makes the God we serve clear in their eyes. We're nothing more than a murky spring and a polluted well. There's a really good example of this when we turn to 1 Kings chapter 22. I want us to look at these two passages. 1 Kings chapter 22. 1 Kings chapter 22, the first 4 verses. 1 Kings 22, verses 1 through 4. It says that 3 years passed without war between Syria and Israel. And it came to pass in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went down to visit the king of Israel. There was this strange relationship that seemed to exist between Jehoshaphat, who was a good king, and Ahab, which was one of the most wicked of all kings that existed. But they seemed to be really good friends. And in verse 3 it says, the king of Israel, which is Ahab, said to his servants, do you not know that Ramoth in Gilead is ours, but we hesitate to take it out of the hands of the king of Syria? So he said to Jehoshaphat, will you go with me to fight at Ramoth Gilead? And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. And so just very briefly, what's happening is that this other nation has control of a land that's supposed to belong to them. Ahab wants to get it back. And so Jehoshaphat, he wants to join in battle with him. And Jehoshaphat says, I'm just as you are. Everything that I have is yours. Ask what you want and I will give it to you. You have an evil king and a good king, and they're forming an alliance. We all know that this is a bad thing. Look down at verse 44. Verse 44. Also, Jehoshaphat made peace with the king of Israel. Now, when you turn over to 2 Chronicles chapter 19, 2 Chronicles chapter 19, it gives us a little more insight to what happens to Jehoshaphat because of this and what he is told. 2 Chronicles chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. Then Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, returned safely to his house in Jerusalem. And Jehu, the son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat, you might want to underline this in your Bibles, should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord? Therefore the wrath of the Lord is upon you. That is the way that God viewed it. Jehoshaphat was someone who was helping someone that he seemed to consider a friend in Ahab. It was a land that belonged to Israel, and so they were going to fight to get it back. But he had made an alliance with an evil king. And he is told that should you help those who are wicked. Another way that we muddy the water is by helping those continue in sin. Another way that we muddy the water is fail to point out the sinfulness that is there without rebuking it. The way that we muddy the water is by associating, forming an alliance, and making peace with those who are wicked. The Bible condemns it from beginning to end. A righteous man may fall 7 times, but he gets back up. A wicked man stumbles in his day of calamity, and that's what he perishes in. God makes a strong distinction. But for those who are righteous, we do need to see also that even though we do make mistakes, and even though sometimes we fall in the midst of our calamity, we have all these feelings of being deprived, of being neglected, of being forsaken, being forgotten, feeling like we don't matter, that our strength is small. The Bible tells us that we can have deliverance. In Proverbs 10 and verse 25, it says that when the tempest, when the storm passes by, the wicked is no more, but the righteous is established forever. Reason being is because we stand strong. We know that the storms are but for a moment. We know they're not going to last forever. And even if they do take our lives, we have something even better that's waiting for us. We are not those who give in to those storms and those trials along the way. In Psalm 37, verse 23, here is why. And this is how it works. Psalm 37, 23 and 24. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. The way it works is this. This is the way the Lord helps us to get back up even after we fall. He is the one that's described here in verse 24 as the one who is holding our hand. Those of you with small children, you know that when you're holding the hand of that small child, how many times do they fall between the car and that front door? But you've got them so that at least you can drag them if they don't want to get back up. But here it says that God holds our hand. And in many ways, that's how we are. We stumble and fall over a lot of things. But God is there holding our hand. This is how he holds our hand, because the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. That's what it means to be righteous, to be just, to be godly, to be holy people. We direct our steps by the way in which the Lord told us. And yes, we're going to stumble from time to time. But God is there to hold us up and to keep us within his hand, within his reach, to help us along the way. In Proverbs 11, verses 4 through 9, notice the difference that's said here between the wicked and the righteous. Where our trust is, where our allegiance is found. It says, riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. The righteousness of the blameless will direct his way aright, but the wicked will fall by his own wickedness. The righteousness of the upright will deliver them, but the unfaithful will be caught by their lust. When a wicked man dies, his expectation will perish, and the hope of the unjust perishes. The righteous is delivered from trouble, and it comes to the wicked instead. The hypocrite with his mouth destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous will be delivered. Notice a few things. That a person who is wicked, that's a person that says here that riches is where his trust is found. Because riches is where his trust is found, he's going to be caught up by his own lust. His expectation, I think if you're using the ESV, it says his expectation of wealth, or his expectation of prosperity, some of your versions may say. His expectation will perish. The hope of the unjust perishes. So notice what it does. Riches, destruction. He's destroyed. He's condemned. Pursuing riches is only going to give you destruction. Right? Lust. He is caught by his lust. He is encaptured. He is made prisoner by those things that he is lusting after and cannot seem to break free. He is stumbling. We see also his expectation will perish. He has no hope. So how do you feel? Do you feel destroyed? Do you feel held captive? Do you feel like someone who doesn't have hope? It may very well be because you're following after riches, you're following after your own lust. The expectation of whatever it is that you're wanting in life doesn't give true hope and fulfillment. The righteous are different. At the very end of that, it gives a synopsis of the righteous by saying this: through knowledge, the righteous will be delivered. The righteous understand what riches are all about. They're not sinful in and of themselves. But when riches is the thing that we're lusting after, and that's our expectation in life, the things that we want, desire, our fleshly hope is based in this world, that's not based in knowledge. That's based in nothing but carnality. But knowledge, what the righteous know and understand, is what gives him deliverance. There's other passages, too, that give us some good practical advice about this. Notice Proverbs 12, verses 6 and 13. Here the tongue is talked about. The words of the wicked are lie in wait for blood, but the mouth of the upright will deliver them. Later it says, the wicked is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, but the righteous will come through the trouble. If you write in your Bible, you might want to write Facebook or Twitter in there. Social media. The words of the wicked are lie in wait for blood. That means using words to hurt someone else. Using words intended to wound. Using words that I think the word today is trigger people. If that's what you're doing, that's what this is talking about. The words of the wicked are lie in wait for blood. Let's see what kind of controversy, what kind of problem I can cause. And we delight in that. But here it says, but the mouth of the upright will deliver them. They're not going to participate in that. They're not going to act that way. The wicked is ensnared by the transgression of his lips, but the righteous will come through the trouble. In other words, they're not going to fall into that trap that others have fallen into. You remember a few moments ago when we talked about the way in which the unrighteous fall into the very trap that was laid for the righteous. How many times have we seen that with something like this? Employers, I was told this 10, 15 years ago, that employers are checking people's potential employees' Facebook accounts, social media accounts, to see what kind of stuff you you say and what you talk about. The people now that are in the job force, when they were in high school, may have been putting a lot of things on there that they're now ashamed and embarrassed about. And because of that, some don't get jobs. And I got to admit, some of the things I've seen on Facebook, I wouldn't want you as my employee either, because I know that you're going to be a troublemaker. I know that you like to participate in some things that aren't conducive to the atmosphere or the culture that you might be applying for a job for. These things come back to haunt you. Even though they may have been 15 years ago, they come back to haunt you. You remember a man by the name of Haman and his dispute with Mordecai. Haman was this person who thought he was so very important, and there was something that he just could not deal with. Mordecai would not bow to him and show him the kind of respect that other people did. So he came up with a plot to make sure that Mordecai was found to be guilty of blasphemy and something that he could be hung for. And so there were false witnesses and these gallows that were going to be made, and he was going to be hung. But then it was uncovered that this man had done something great, and the king said, how can we reward somebody like this? Haman obviously thought he was talking about himself. He said, well, you need to put him in this place of prestige and honor and have all the people honor him. He said, that's a good idea. Go find Mordecai and do that for him. And you can imagine his rage. And then you remember also what happened to him. He was hung on the very gallows that he had made. You remember Daniel? That the people that were trying to get him out of this position of great authority and respect, because he prayed like he did in former days, he was thrown into a den of lions, but God stopped the mouth of the lions. The next day when he comes out of the den, the king is rejoicing over that. And then the ones who made these accusations against David, he cast them, their wives, and their children into the den. And it said that the lions crushed their bones of all of them before they ever hit the floor in the den. That's what we're talking about. The righteous come through the trouble, but those who are wicked end up being captured by the very wickedness that they planned. We have to understand that, yes, we may stumble, but we are those who get back up. And we have to refuse to stay down, no matter what it is that came upon us. We're comforted by this, and this is from the ESV version, Psalm 34, 15 through 19. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears toward their cry, such as what it was with David when he was in the lion's den. He could hear that. He knew what was happening. The face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. When the righteous cry out for help, the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. But the Lord delivers him out of them all. Not out of most, but out of them all. There's no reason to keep stumbling. There's no reason to keep down that same path. Whenever we see these occasions, and they are hard and difficult, we need to see them in the right light and in the right perspective. They should be an occasion for great joy. James 1, 2 through 4 tells us this. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. It gives us an occasion to go through these struggles and not feel like we're constrained by them, but we are cocooned by them. And I came upon that this week as I was studying this, and I thought that was a very interesting idea because that caterpillar, before he can become that butterfly, has to be put within a cocoon. And when he's in that cocoon, that can feel very constraining. And if you put that into our own lives, the idea of breaking free from that cocoon and then trying to fly, something you've never done before, can seem overwhelming. That cocoon is literally a place of death. That the thing that went into that cocoon is not going to be the same thing that comes out of it. But now the potential for it to fly and to spread beauty everywhere is there. But the idea of stepping out and doing things different, because that cocoon's not going to be there, if it gets hard, if it gets difficult, if you get tired, you can't go back. It was once said by the young butterfly to the mother butterfly. That's easy to say. But, oh, Mom, what if I fall? She said, yes, my child, but what if you fly? What is our perspective? Sometimes we see the trials and we see the testing of our faith. We see it as something where God seems to be constraining us. But maybe it's not about what you're going through, but who you are. Maybe the struggle is not really with the outside. Maybe the struggle is the inside. Maybe it's not about the circumstances, but it's about you in the circumstances. Do you keep doing things the same way and keep being met with the same failure? That is the literal definition that we know for insanity. But it's also what the Bible is talking about when it says, the righteous may fall 7 times, but he gets back up. But the wicked falls in the day of calamity. He stumbles in it. He keeps tripping and never gets back on his feet. He never gets firm footing. Let the trials and the difficulty give us something that makes us stronger, gives us endurance. There was one definition of endurance that I came upon that I thought was really good. It means to remain in existence. And I thought that was really interesting and a really good definition for it. It's about keeping your resilience. It's about keep moving forward. It's about allowing endurance to actually grow within us. There's been a lot of movies that feature the hero. And in many of these movies, it may be that the hero is met with these overwhelming odds. And he's beat down, and he's beat down, and he's beat down. And people all around him are saying, just stay down, just stay down. And he refuses to do so. He just keeps getting up. And he keeps moving forward. And he doesn't quit. In one of the movies, it says, that's how winning is done. And that is so true. For us as Christians especially, let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing along the way. Let's close with Psalm 124. Several years ago, we went through the Psalms of Ascent. And if you remember that these Psalms were a collection that were sung as the pilgrims would go to one of the annual feasts. And as they're marching along and journeying along with their family and their friends, that this is one of the songs that they would sing. These songs were to praise God and to remind them of what their pilgrimage was all about and why it was that they were actually serving God and what God had done for them as individuals and as a nation. And notice Psalm 124 and verse 1. We'll read the entire psalm. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side. And then he asked for a response from the people. Let Israel now say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when men rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us alive. When their wrath was kindled against us, then the waters would have overwhelmed us. The stream would have gone over our soul. Then the swollen waters would have gone over our soul. Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us as prey to their teeth. Our soul has escaped as a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. And I think that's a wonderful psalm to encourage us that, yes, you may fall and you may stumble, but get back up. Because if it had not been the Lord who was on your side, you would have been overwhelmed. But because the Lord is on your side, get back up. Get back up and start anew. You have real hope. You have a God who made heaven and earth. What can the world do to you? Do not quit and do not ever stop. My question I want to leave with you this morning is this one. Will you refuse to stay down? If that's where you're at this morning and you need help, if you need to be baptized so that your sins may be washed away, that just as Christ was raised from the dead, so you can be raised from the waters of baptism, ready to walk in newness of life. If there's something you're struggling with and you need help, you're surrounded by a group of people who can help you. Another thing that we can learn from this lesson is this. Asking for help does not mean you are weak. Asking for help means you are surrounded by people who love you. That's what the invitation is about. And so if we can help you in any way this morning, please come as we stand and sing this song.